All right, I think we can go ahead and get started. I'll call to order the Election Commission meeting at 6 o'clock. And for the record, we have Commissioner Moody, Commissioner Malatu, Commissioner Kish, and Commissioner Workman. And myself, Kristen Rosenbaum, City Clerk, and we have City Attorney Tammy Yellico, and Thomas DePirio, Planner, and Glenn Alanis, Policy Planning Manager. And so that's roll call. Third item on the agenda is audience participation, and this is a time when anyone can, from the public, can provide input on what we're going through right now, which is ward redistricting. We have all of our options that the commission is considering up on our website. We've pushed those notifications through our social media avenues, and as you can see in our packet, we received an email between the last meeting we had and this meeting, and then 2 additional emails came in this evening, and so everyone should have copies of those as well that you can take a look at. And it looks like we have a couple people in the audience this time, and so Rebecca Bean, if you'd like to stand and provide your comments.
Alrighty, so hi everybody. I'm a Ward 1 resident, so I'm really just gonna focus on Ward 1 because I don't like when people tell me how to do my neighborhood, so I'm not gonna try to tell the other wards how to draw theirs. So basically, my main focus is, I know Ward 1 is pretty densely populated, so please just kind of keep that in consideration when you're doing your planning. I did like alternative 1 the best, even though it does seem to have a little bit more population just because of some other reasons. So Ward 1 has a very vibrant commercial component to it that I wouldn't like to see split up by removing the precinct up by I-25 and 104th. I think it's important to keep those economic considerations in mind, especially in light of other things going on in the ward with revitalization. I don't want it to, this redistricting to adversely impact those, because I don't want the ward to ever be seen as like a drain on the city, or like we're pumping more money into it than it's contributing to the economy or anything of that nature. So I think it's really important that we keep our commercial districts intact. Also, I'd like to see original Thornton stay intact as an original Thornton resident. A little selfish in that way. I think it's really important, like from a community identity perspective. I mean, it is the original community of Thornton, and you know, it has a lot of unique characters, and it just seems weird that part of original Thornton would be taken out. It's, you know, it's a very, you know, how can I put this? Very cohesive community, and just like being like, oh, this random little square here is going to go over to a different ward seems strange. So, and then I'm a little concerned with the adding of the district along 104th, where the where the King Soopers is and all of that jazz, just because that community, that area has a bit of a situation with unhoused people and crime, and sometimes people like to paint Ward 1 as a bit of a higher crime area with a larger unhoused population, and I just don't want to artificially inflate those numbers or further that false narrative. It's just, yeah, I'm like, even though I do, you know, have a strong focus on commercial areas, I just don't want to see a situation where, you know, 6 months down the road, city council's like, well, you guys just have high crime, so we can't worry about that or something, because it just seems like any excuse to sort of diminish Ward 1's contribution to the city will be exploited to its fullest advantage. And I just don't want to see something like an artificial spike in crime, especially or in unhoused people, being used as another cudgel to beat Ward 1 residents over the head. So I just kind of like, and also stays fairly close to its current configuration. And so that's another consideration. There's a couple of the other ones have like weird little extensions that are barely connected. It's like, okay, so it's connected by the strip that is a street and nothing else. And so that's just strange. And it just kind of seems weird, almost reminiscent of like gerrymandering. So like, just try to keep the communities cohesive along, you know, intuitive boundaries instead of trying to get extra creative just to throw 1,000 people into another ward to make things more balanced. And then also, there's not a whole lot of us here, so maybe consider having more opportunities for comment. Because I'm surprised, usually there's a lot more people who come to comment on these things. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. And we have Sandra Wolf. Would you like to go ahead?
Hi, everybody. It's good to see some of you I haven't seen for a while. Basically, I agree with everything she said. I've been in Ward 1 for 30 years. I'm very happy where I'm at, and I came here to get a little bit more understanding of really what we're going to accomplish by these movements, if there is any. So basically, I'm here to get educated a lot more. So, and thank you for what you guys do. I just want to throw this in. Did you have Jared Weber was on your committee?
Yes.
Yeah, I took his place on the HOA in Park North. So he's gone and I guess he's enjoying Florida, right? Is that where he went? Lucky guy. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, and it looks like we have a few people who have joined us online. So if there's anyone online who would like to address the commission, they can press the raise hand button now or *9 and they can provide comments. All right, looks like no one has raised their hand. So we will go ahead and move forward with our next agenda item, which is approval of the minutes. And so at this time, I would take a motion to approve the minutes.
Madam Chairman,
Thank you. Can I get a second?
I'll second that.
Thank you. All those, or is any discussion on those? Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, so those are passed unanimously. And next on our agenda is the ward redistricting review and discussion of alternatives. And so at this time, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Glenda Lanus, our policy planning manager.
I'm Glenda Lennis, I'm the policy planning manager, and we've been working on the analysis of the options and providing some, today we provided new options last time, and this time we're providing a couple additional items. And I'd like to introduce Thomas D'Imperio. The planner is going to present those new options and then go over the ones we went into last time as well. And I'd also say that.
Excuse us, we do have one person who wants to make a
Oh, okay.
public comment.
Yeah, sorry.
Sorry to interrupt you.
Just real quick,
Didn't mean to do that.
before I was able to, I saw one person raise their hand, so we'll go ahead and allow them to address the commission. Jessica Garcia. You should be able to unmute yourself now.
Hello, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yes, thank you, Jessica.
Hi, sorry, I just kind of raised my hand at the last minute. I have a couple questions and then comments. The first one, I just wanna, echo one of the prior Ward 1 residents that speak. Let's try to keep original Thornton as, Ward 1 and not separate that. And that comes with history of the city. Ward 1, is where our city was founded. It was the first ward, and I think it should remain untouched and keep historically, untouched, like for forever. I think it's very important, especially with the museum and all that stuff that is gonna happen. The second one, why you guys have in the maps these weird like islands, little edges like that instead of keep a same area, and the redistricting rules, it says it needs to keep an area, a whole. But if you guys have these little things, and I know that you guys can get away by just having cash even with one street, but why keep these little things? Just a little looks weird. And the other one is let's plan the redistricting of the word based on 2020 census. Let's not project population changes, because it's gonna change, because I don't see any changes in Ward 3 and Ward 4. And I'm acknowledge that our population is changing because Ward 3 and Ward 4 are gaining more residents. However, let's try to keep population equally numbers so we can keep representation, just equal in all wards. That's something that is very important for us. I think that's it for my comments.
Okay, great, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And so if you want to go ahead and continue.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
if I could, before we move on to action item 4B, we have some emails here. I'm just wondering if it would be appropriate to review those now. Comments?
I think during the presentation, the comments will be addressed.
Okay, thank you.
So, so I'm Glenda Lennis in Policy Planning Division, the Policy Planning Manager. We did the analysis and we helped create the alternatives, and GIS did all the mapping, and we'll be, Thomas D'Imperio is here, and he's happy to do the presentation tonight, so I'll pass it on to him.
Thanks, Linda. So I'll go ahead and get started. So the purpose of tonight's meeting is to present additional information and redistricting alternatives to be reviewed by the Election Commission, and to clarify some of the outstanding comments that we've received as well. So we'll do an overview of the 3 alternatives that are being carried over from the last time, with 2 new alternatives that will be presented tonight. So the total number of alternatives that we'll look at is 5, but I do want to remind members of the audience, people tuning in, that the Election Commission did vote to eliminate 2 of the alternatives that were presented last time, and for continuity's sake, we kept the same naming scheme for the alternatives. So tonight we'll see alternatives 1, 3, and 5, which are the 3 that are carried over from last time. And the 2 new alternatives will be alternatives 6 and 7. So 2 and 4 were eliminated by the Election Commission last time and will not be present. So there's a grand total of 5. And I do want to remind people tuning in of the various requirements and guidelines that we have for this redistricting process. So the first one is population equity, which means that the population of each ward must be relatively similar to the population count of the other wards. This is generally defined as the deviation between the largest and smallest ward should not exceed 10% of the average ward population. So that way, all 4 wards have a very similar number of residents across all wards. Of course, strict equality is hard to achieve based on the other constraints that we are working with. So there will be different numbers of people in each ward, but they are all roughly equitable in terms of number of residents. Second is no minority vote dilution. So we can't politically gerrymander the ward boundaries to dilute the voting power of minority voting groups. We cannot draw the ward boundaries to so that a sitting council member now finds themselves living in a different ward than the one that they were elected to represent. The next one is more of a guideline than a hard requirement, but we are encouraged to follow county precinct boundaries to the maximum extent possible, although many of the alternatives do split county precincts, so that's more of a guideline. Next, back to requirements, the ward boundaries are supposed to be as compact as possible, of course, while balancing some of the other requirements such as population equity. And they do need to be contiguous, so no portion of a ward can be completely separated from the rest of that ward's area. and then preservation of communities of interest. And we did have some comments related to communities of interest, and so I kind of want to go over the definition that Thornton has for communities of interest and just kind of address that a little bit. So communities of interest include geographic areas comprised of groups of individuals with similar policy concerns that can be related to racial, social, economic, demographic, environmental, transportation, agricultural, industrial, or similar issues. And keeping geographic areas that include communities of interest together allows for greater representation of these communities and their interests, whereas attempting to distribute such communities across ward boundaries may dilute the voting power of these communities. We have looked at various data points and information, including the housing needs assessment and the community profile that was done during the comprehensive plan process in 2019 and 2020 to determine if there are any geographically based communities of interest that need to be taken into consideration. We did identify the Hispanic Latino population as a notable community of interest because about a third of Thornton's residents identify as Hispanic or Latino. And this population is concentrated more in the southern part of the city. So a big component of the communities of interest is geographic proximity. When looking at other data points such as socioeconomic status or housing, the data shows similar patterns and would not show a statistically significant change with each alternative that has been presented. And so we can look at that on this next slide here. So this graphic was taken from the previously mentioned community profile, which is Appendix A of the Thornton Comprehensive Plan that was adopted a little over 2 years ago now. And so we can see that the Hispanic Latino population in Thornton is largely concentrated south of 104th Avenue, predominantly in the southern part of the city. And as far as socioeconomic indicators, the green circles represent total households experiencing poverty. And I do want to mention that that is a percentage of total households, not of Hispanic and Latino households. So as we can see, there are strong ethnic and socioeconomic indicators, and the concentration in the southern part of the city is indicative that these are communities of interest that we should largely seek to preserve and disturb them as to the least extent possible with the redistricting process. Again, having to balance all of those other requirements that we previously explained. Furthermore, the larger green circles represent a higher percentage of households experiencing poverty. Many of those areas are concentrated in the southwest part of the city and are unlikely to be significantly affected by any of the redistricting alternatives. So again, the key component of communities of interest is geographic proximity, and the other notable community of interest that has presented itself based on feedback from the public that we've received since the last meeting and during tonight's meeting indicates that original Thornton is a community of interest that we should look to preserve as well. So that's kind of an overview of how Thornton has defined communities of interest and where they are located in the city.
Thanks for putting that together.
Absolutely.
Or sharing it with us.
Yeah. And so these next couple slides should look familiar to the Election Commission and anybody that tuned in last time. So for anybody that is tuning in for the first time, the way that these slides are set up is that the left map is the current ward boundaries as they exist today, which due to population shifts do need to be redrawn. And the map on the right-hand side represents the alternative that we are discussing. And again, you will not see alternatives 2 and 4 since those were eliminated last time. So we'll go through each of the maps. But before I go into more detail, there's a couple housekeeping things. So the first is that due to just the characteristics of housing and population growth in Thornton since the last time redistricting was done, the overwhelming majority of new housing units have been built in the northern part of the city in wards 3 and 4. It's something like over 80% of all new housing units are in ward 3 or 4. So therefore, that represents a larger population shift towards the north and shows why Ward 3 needs to lose some population to Ward 2. Now, the intent is not to pack or gerrymander Ward 1. It's just indicative of the nature and location of growth in the city since the last time ward redistricting was done. So we can see that across all 5 alternatives, the boundaries for Ward 4 are not proposed to change at all. There is that sliver of Ward 4 that extends south of 120th Avenue. However, when we attempted to look at an alternative with that area being moved into Ward 2, which is the only viable scenario for that area, it resulted in the population equity deviation exceeding 10% and would make Ward 4 way too small, essentially. It would move too much population out of Ward 4, and it would be more than 10% smaller than the largest ward at that point. There was just no way that it would work while maintaining the population equity requirement.
And that would be against what the Supreme Court has given as guidelines.
Exactly. Yeah, we're needing to maintain a 10% deviation. And there was just no way to do that with moving that portion of Ward 4 into Ward 2.
10% at a maximum.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. So with that being said, the boundaries for Ward 4 are not proposed to change at all. And when it comes to Ward 3, Ward 3 will lose precinct 133 and 135. I'm sorry, I can't read it from here. To Ward 2, or the northern half of precinct 135. So this would reunite I can't remember the name of that subdivision. Let's see, the Woodglen subdivision that was previously split. So in alternative 1, there would be no split precincts due to Ward 2 inheriting the precinct 137 and northern half of 135 from Ward 3. And because of the nature of population growth in the city, other than that change to Ward 3 and Ward 2, no other changes to the boundaries of Ward 3 are proposed across any of the alternatives. So for lack of a better phrase, the population and geographic boundaries for Wards 3 and 4 will remain constant throughout each of the 5 alternatives, and therefore the only viable scenarios for redistricting involve Wards 1 and 2. And that is also due to the peculiar nature of Thornton's boundaries and the location of North Glen, roughly in the geographic center of the city. We are very constrained with how we can draw the ward boundaries while maintaining population equity, contiguity, and compactness. So those are some of the constraints that we're working with, and of course, population equity and avoiding gerrymandering are of the utmost importance to us. It's just that we have many other constraints that we need to be mindful of when doing these scenarios. So again, in alternative 1, other than the precinct and a half that Ward 3 is losing to Ward 2, the only other change is that precinct 114 will move into Ward 1 from Ward 2. And subdivisions affected by this change include Thornton Valley East, and the Villages North subdivision. And in looking at the population equity chart here, the key number to pay attention to is the largest number or the smallest negative number. And because the populations for Ward 3 and 4 remain the same across all 5 alternatives, and Ward 4 remains the largest proposed ward in terms of population across all 5, and Ward 3 remains the smallest in terms of population, all 5 alternatives that will be presented tonight have the same maximum population deviation between the largest ward and the smallest ward. So Ward 4 is proposed to be the largest ward and stay at 36,403 residents across all 5 scenarios. And Ward 3 is proposed to be the smallest ward in terms of population at 34,332. So those population numbers for wards 3 and 4 will stay the same across all alternatives, and only Ward 1 and 2 will see population shifts. So that being said, all of the population equity requirements for all alternatives are met. We were able to achieve a deviation of 5.84%, which is well below the 10% maximum as directed by the Supreme Court. So unless there's specific questions, I won't spend too much time on the population breakdowns now that we know that the target deviation doesn't change.
But the Wood Glen subdivision would be would move the Ward 2, right? But it would be together again, right?
Exactly. Right now, the southern half of Wood Glen is in Ward 2, while the
Yeah.
northern half is in Ward 3. So in all 5 scenarios, we're proposing to reunite it, and the northern half would move from Ward 3 to Ward 2, including the areas to the north as well. So again, alternative 2 was eliminated last time, so we'll move on to alternative 3. Again, wards 3 and 4 have the same boundaries as alternative 1, with that precinct and a half moving into Ward 2 from Ward 3. And then alternative 3 would see precinct 116, which includes the Welby Station subdivision and the Thornton Mobile Estates subdivision, which is on the far southeastern corner of the city, would move into Ward 1 from Ward 2. And then precinct 111 would be split roughly in half along Thornton Parkway, with the north half remaining in Ward 2, and that includes the North Hills and Reserve at Thornton subdivisions, with the south half containing the Parkwood subdivision and a portion of original Thornton moving into Ward 1. And this is one that the commission saw last time. And again, the population equity chart shows that the largest deviation, again, is between 3 and 4 at 5.84%. Again, there's no alternative 4. And so alternative 5 maintains the same boundaries for wards 3 and 4 as previously discussed. This would also see precinct 111 split in half along Thornton Parkway, just as in alternative 3, with the north half remaining in Ward 2 and the south half moving to Ward 1. This would also see precinct 110 containing the York Highlands subdivision move into Ward 1 from Ward 2. And precinct 105, which extends westward to Interstate 25 on the west and Washington Street on the east, would move into Ward 2 from Ward 1. This configuration is notable because while the precinct boundaries for 105 are maintained, the way that the precinct is drawn does split 23 homes in the Loma Linda subdivision. So those 23 homes would move into Ward 2, while the remainder of homes in the Loma Linda subdivision would stay in Ward 1. So,
And it would split the York, is it Yorkboro, that entire area there? I noticed it would split that community. Right now it's in Ward 2. It would split it and put it in Ward 1. So I think it would split the community too.
okay, which one is that?
That would be to the right of precinct 110. That's a fairly large community going all the way up to the tracks.
Okay. We will definitely take a note of that. North Hills and Reserve at Thornton subdivisions. Okay. Okay, that is noted for alternative 5.
And also it dilutes the Hispanic population more than, let's say, 3 does.
Okay. Yeah, and on that note as well, we tried to maintain similar proportions of Hispanic Latino population across all ward boundaries. Given the population shifts and demographic changes that have occurred in the city, both wards 1 and 2 likely would lose a small proportion of Hispanic Latino population. Again, that was largely unavoidable, but it's also not statistically significant. But we did analyze that very closely
Okay.
as well.
Madam Chairperson,
Yes.
did you want comments while we're talking about this or wait till afterwards? And I'm
It's-
sorry, Thomas, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
It's a
Oh, no
pleasure of the
worries.
commission, if you wanna provide comments now or wait till the end. It's a pleasure.
Okay,
Are you asking?
I'm asking.
Yeah, I'd rather wait to the end.
Wait till the end?
that's what I was wondering.
Okay,
That is the last of the 3 alternatives that were presented at the last meeting. So again, I won't spend too much time on the population equity charts unless there's specific questions, because they all have the same target deviation. So this is alternative 6. This was submitted by a member of the public after last meeting. And this would see York Street be, or the equivalent of where York Street would be, the boundary between Ward 1 and Ward 2, with Ward 1 being everything to the west of York Street and Ward 2 being everything to the east. Notably, this would see Precinct 106, which includes the Lambertson Apartments, the Avena Apartments, also known as the Broadstone Subdivision, and the Lambertson Lake Subdivision move into Ward 1 from Ward 2. And this would also split precincts 113 and 115, which is notable because this would split original Thornton roughly at York Street, with the western part remaining in Ward 1 and the eastern part moving into Ward 2. So while this does achieve a very high degree of compactness and contiguity, especially for wards 1 and 2, but for all wards, it would split original Thornton, which, as members of the public have indicated, is not a necessarily preferred configuration for original Thornton. As I mentioned before, wards 3 and 4 are still the smallest and largest wards respectively, and so we're maintaining that 5.84% deviation between the largest and smallest ward. And unless there's any specific questions about alternative 6, I'll move on to alternative 7. So this alternative was derived after we received updated information regarding the residence of a sitting council member. It opened up another precinct eligible to move into a different ward, since one of the requirements is that we cannot draw the boundaries so that a sitting council member now finds themselves living in a different ward.
Right.
So we received an updated address and we're able to draft this alternative 7. This would see precinct 106 containing the Lambertson Apartments, Avena Apartments, and Lambertson Lake Subdivision moving into Ward 1 from Ward 2, similar to alternative 6. This would also see precinct 109 moving into Ward 2 from Ward 1. It's kind of hard to see on this map, but precinct 109 would be split at Thornton Parkway, since the precinct boundary continues south of Thornton Parkway. The reason for this split is to preserve that section of original Thornton within Ward 1, since if we followed the precinct boundary, it would split that portion of original Thornton and move that portion into Ward 2. So other subdivisions affected in precinct 109 would be Wind Dance, Rancho Viejo, Harvest Ridge, and this would also split the McCoy Hills subdivision along the western precinct line. However, this split does coincide with the existing school district boundaries, with homes on either side of that line being in different school districts. So it's already somewhat split, so to speak, and would still maintain original Thornton largely within Ward 1. And so again, wards 3 and 4 are the smallest and largest respectively. However, I do want to point out that with alternative 7, we were able to achieve very close population numbers across Ward 1 and Ward 2, with just a little bit over 240 people being the difference, which is about as close as we were really able to get it while balancing all of the other concerns. So while the overall deviation stays constant at 5.84%, the population of Ward 1 and Ward 2 would be pretty much equal with alternative 7. And so for a comparison of how that looks, we have this slide here that just at a glance shows the population deviation breakdowns for each of the alternatives presented tonight. I think that's all that I have.
I just have one additional comment to Thomas's presentation, and that is just responding to somebody who spoke online just a moment ago. All the numbers that have been used here are the 2020 census numbers. They're all the 2020 census numbers, and we didn't add on bits and pieces or anything. We just used that raw data from the 2020 census.
As required by law.
Exactly.
Yes.
All right. Commissioner Kish, did you want to start with questions or comments?
First of all, thank you guys for doing a good job. And I like alternative 7. It keeps many of the subdivisions, especially I think Wood Glen, together, which we've heard some complaints in the past that we've had to split that before. So I like that. Let me see. Even though it's high degree of compactness and contiguity, it does result in 1.3% reduction in Hispanics for Ward 1 and a 0.5% for Ward 2. But, you know, those are very small in the big picture. Ward 3 would lose half a precinct. You know, in the past, I've been concerned that I don't like to split precincts because you have one half of the street, you know, going to vote here and the other half going to vote here. But with mail-in voting, that doesn't make a whole lot of difference anymore. And so, for example, I remember my neighbor telling me that, yeah, the neighbors across the street have to go to this precinct and these people have to go to this precinct to vote. Doesn't matter anymore. So I really like 7. I think it meets all of our requirements, and I feel the same way about alternative 6. And I'm impressed that this was developed by a community member. And so one of the concerns that I've heard is that on Washington Street, the business communities that that they wanted that commercials businesses to stay in Ward 1, and alternative 6 does that. I do have a question. Does alternative 6 split Old Thornton?
It does, yeah. So precincts 113 and 115 are split along York Street, or where York Street would be if it was you know, kind of a straight line down.
Right.
And that does split original Thornton.
So I am trying to picture that, where that is. So that would be York, and that would be South Thornton Parkway. You know, there's a lot of new homes there also, even though it's part of Old Thornton. That's also an area that they've built new homes in that area along the railroad tracks, the RTD tracks and west. So that's a new development also. I think some of those homes are also new, even though it's part of Old Thornton. It's considered part of Old Thornton. Once again, the results for the reduction of Hispanic and Latino communities is very small. So, yeah, I'm feeling comfortable with that. I just don't like to see subdivisions and parts of the city split. I do have a little bit concerned that that does split Old Thornton. Alternative 5, I'm not comfortable with this at all, only because it splits Yorkboro and that whole area. And it also splits, does this split Loma Linda?
It does, yeah. Alternative 5 does.
Yeah, I think we need to be real sensitive with the community on that. You know, whenever possible. Once again, try not to split communities. So that's probably one of my least favorites.
Are there other comments from other commissioners?
I'm gonna go with positive today first. I like 7. But can you just explain to me, with the deviation is so small, the percentage is much closer to all of the populations, I really like it. Why did you, I understand you don't want to split it, so 109, the precinct kind of moved to 2,
Which alternative are you talking
7.
about? 7? Okay, thank you.
Can you repeat it about 106, what you said at the precinct?
About 106 or 109?
Yeah, 106.
So 106 would move into Ward 1. We didn't, the main reason that wasn't an option in alternatives 1, 3, and 5 was because we had an outdated address for the council member.
Oh.
Yeah, so the new alternatives do feature that precinct moving into Ward 1, whereas previously it was off limits due to that constraint. But
Okay.
we now know that that council member lives elsewhere in Ward 2, and so it opened that up for these configurations.
7 is my first, and then one thing, I like 5. The only question is there another way to keep the homes that you mentioned about splitting 23 homes? Is there a different way to do it?
We could look at an alternative that would split that precinct but maintain Loma Linda within Ward 1. We would need to go back to the software, but that is something that we could explore.
Okay.
And at 23 homes, it's unlikely that would cause a significant population shift that would throw off the equity count. So we can look into that.
Other comments?
I agree with the two of them. I like alternative number 7. At the same time, though, I also like alternative number 1. There seems to be some strong community sentiment regarding keeping original Thornton together. Alternative 1 does that well, and then adds that precinct 114. So as far as I'm concerned, I think 1 and 7 are probably the best alternatives that we have in front of us.
Commissioner Workman?
Yeah, I'm agreeing with most of what everyone else is saying. 7 is one of the top choices I can see, especially considering the Old Thornton, original Thornton concerns. I like alternative 6 due to compactness, and it seems more like it was fairly drawn rather than arbitrarily drawn. But yielding to the concerns of the community, I would say that that's number 7 is good as well.
So it looks like every commission member picked alternative 7. Is everyone comfortable with moving forward, crafting a recommendation with that alternative? Or is there a desire to look at some of the other alternatives with some adjustments? And I would entertain a motion either way to do either of those.
I motion to accept to go with alternative 7.
Okay? Do we have a second?
I'll second that motion, Madam Chair.
And I'll open up for discussion. I think, Tammy, if you want to jump in, feel free, but we need to start crafting kind of the reasons why. And I think part of that was discussed prior to the motion, but just
Right.
put that on the
The
record.
reason why you think this alternative meets the guidelines that we're trying to focus upon. Minority dilution, population, compactness, contiguity. And a lot of that is with the text that the staff here provided you. I don't know if you want to look at that, maybe add anything to that.
So Commissioner Malatu, since you made the motion, if you'd like to start.
The first thing the first one I did not like last week or a couple of weeks ago was there was a height deviation difference and more populated in Ward 1. This one is more spread, kind of equality. I like that. And there was one thing, I don't remember what yeah, and then there's not a lot of high, with Latino population reduction. I don't see that. Right? It just, the number is very low.
Alright.
And keeping the original door, and I like that. I think it's important.
I'm not sure that's noted in the text. Maybe it is, but we
It
should
is.
add it if not. On 7, right, that it doesn't split original thinking.
Additional discussion from other commission members?
Well, I liked because it keeps Wood Glen subdivision together as well as other subdivisions, like Yorkboro and in Ward 2. I'm feeling very comfortable with this too.
Any additional discussion?
I think they hit on some of the big ones here. I mean, as far as the population distribution, this I think is about the most even out of all the alternatives in front of us. It's also quite compact. Overall, I like it.
All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, so this is the alternative that will move forward with as a recommendation to City Council. We will post it on our website that this is the recommended alternative, and there'll be another opportunity for feedback. I think it would be good to schedule one more meeting with the Election Commission so that we can review any feedback from the recommended alternative, and then also look at a draft presentation to the election, or to the City Council. And that would be from the Election Commission, so we can do that a number of different ways, unless Tammy, you have other advice, but
No, that's fine.
we could kind of split it up, have Thomas do his presentation and each member of the Election Commission either as support or having talking points. But we can discuss that at our next meeting.
For clarification, for alternates with like a second one from the one we have, or?
No, this would be the recommended
Okay.
alternative. This would be the recommended option.
Okay.
Yeah.
And maybe we should make sure, I mean, is you wanna take one option forward or, and not to open up the door again, but, you know, you could take 2 options forward if you wanted to, yeah. I think this is crisp and clean and gives council something, you know, to really look at, but.
I agree. I think there wasn't any other that we all agreed on.
Kind of coalesced
So,
around.
so if we were
All
gonna
right.
try to take a second one. it
No,
didn't
that
seem
makes
like
sense,
it.
that makes sense, I just wanna make sure, yeah.
All right, with that being said, do we want to meet next week or do we want to meet in 2 weeks? And is Wednesday still a good day for that? So will we be looking at August 3rd or August 10th? if Wednesdays are still good.
10th, please.
Is there any
Yeah,
objection to the 10th? 6 p.m.? Right here.
Here.
Okay, great. So next meeting will be 6 o'clock on the 10th. We'll get the information out on our website. And the next item on the agenda is other matters. Are there any other matters for the election commission? All right, hearing none, then I would take a motion to adjourn the meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Has been moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, we're adjourned at 6:50 p.m. Thank you all very much.